Thank you. The chair would now like to recognize Mr. Tamagro. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, members of the committee, for the opportunity to appear before you today to speak about the work of the Guam War Claims Review Commission. My name is Mauricio Tamargo. I had the distinct honor of serving as the chairman of the Review Commission, and I served with a very talented and knowledgeable group of fellow commissioners and staff. For the sake of brevity, I am summarizing my remarks. The Review Commission was an advisory body established by the Secretary of Interior pursuant to the Guam War Claims Review Commission Act, enacted in December of 2002. The Review Commission was established to determine whether there was parity of war claims paid to the residents of Guam under the Guam Meritorious Claims Act as compared with awards made to other similarly affected U.S. citizens or nationals in territories occupied by Imperial Japanese military forces during World War II, and to advise on any additional compensation which may be necessary to compensate the people of Guam for death, personal injury, forced labor, forced march, and internment suffered at the hands of the Japanese forces during the occupation. The island of Guam was a U.S. territory when Japan forces attacked it on December 8, 1941. 2 days later, on December 10th, the Japanese overran and occupied the island. What followed was a period of 32 months of cruel, brutal, and barbaric oppression of the people of Guam by the Japanese occupation forces. Great numbers of islanders were beaten. The Commission found that great numbers of islanders were beaten and whipped, and many of the women were raped. There were numerous beheadings. In the last months of the occupation, nearly all of the islanders were subjected to forced labor and forced marches and herded into concentration areas, including the elderly and the very young, causing them to suffer acutely from malnutrition, exposure, and disease. The Review Commission found that U.S. forces began the liberation of Guam on July 21, 1944, and the United States declared Guam secure on August 10, 1944. We also found that the Navy immediately began organizing the island as a base from which the U.S. intended to launch air and sea attacks in the direction of Japan. The U.S. Navy also devoted as much material and effort as it could spare to constructing shelters and providing assistance to the residents of Guam. Housing and shelter was scarce on Guam, not just because of the combat fighting between the U.S. and Japanese forces, but also because many of the residents were being displaced by the ever-increasing buildup of U.S. forces on the island. The task of both acquiring all necessary lands for U.S. forces and for providing monetary relief for damages to the residents of Guam was undertaken by the Navy's Land and Claims Unit, which later became the Navy's Land and Claims Commission. As the first word in both organizations' titles implies, the Navy's priority was acquiring all the necessary land on the island needed by the military for war effort, not attending to the claims of the residents of the island. To a great extent, this is understandable as the U.S. was still engaged in a very serious war effort. The Review Commission report acknowledges that the Navy's efforts on behalf of the residents of Guam was admirable. However, the Review Commission also noted that the two missions of the Land and Claims Commission were at cross purposes, because while the Navy was trying to inform the residents of Guam of their right to file a claim, and while it was trying to provide them with shelter and housing, the Navy was also displacing much of the population of Guam. Ultimately, the Navy grew to occupy 75% of the island. Within weeks after the termination of hostilities on Guam, the Congress enacted the Guam Meritorious Claims Act of 1945. In addition to providing other authorizations, this act directed the Navy to provide immediate relief to the people of Guam in the form of monetary payments. In undertaking its task, the Review Commission conducted extensive research on the administration of the Guam Meritorious Claims Act of 1945 by the Navy's Land and Claims Commission, comparing that claims program to other claims programs conducted pursuant to other acts of Congress. The Review Commission also conducted hearings on Guam and in Washington, D.C. Finally, the Review Commission submitted its report to the Secretary of Interior and to specified congressional committees summarizing our findings and our recommendations. The Review Commission, as detailed in our report, found that the Navy's Land and Claims Commission, administered pursuant to the Guam Meritorious Claims Act of 45, was significantly flawed and fell short on a number of important counts when compared to the claims programs provided to the residents of other U.S. territories. The most significant of the flaws of this claims program was the poor public notice given to the residents of Guam and to the short opportunity for residents of Guam to file claims in the claims program. The Review Commission also found, and I would like to now make special mention of the fact, that the residents of Guam during the Japanese military occupation exhibited great courage and loyalty to the United States in face of extreme hostility, and they did it at a time when the outlook for the U.S. prevailing in the war was far from assured. In conclusion, the 5 commissioners who served on the Review Commission came from different points of view and different backgrounds, as well as from both political parties, and yet we came to the findings and recommendations unanimously. I stand by these findings and recommendations and continue to believe strongly that they should be implemented. I would also like to say that those of us who came to the Review Commission from the Foreign Claims Settlement Commission were pleased to have had the opportunity to use our familiarity and expertise regarding war claims issues to assist in this important work. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement. I'm happy to respond to any questions that you or the members and the ranking member may have. Thank you.
Thank you. I would now like to recognize retired Brigadier General Blas and also a former member of this body for an opening statement. Thank you for being here today, General.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, ranking member, members of the committee. I came here to use my time reading my statement as the others have done. I have decided to forego that, sir, because with all due respect, in your opening statement, I was concerned about some comments that I feel that if I don't respond, there might not be another opportunity for me to respond. I'm very sincere when I say to you, with all due respect, as a former member, I understand fully the responsibilities that you have and what decisions you need to make and how you weigh one against the other. But having mentioned the Heritage Foundation, and it's apparently the source of much of your information, you just admitted something for the record. I say to you, sir, please read my statement later on. Let me just start with the first thing that you mentioned about the citizens of Guam, 4356, were received $808 million, and you said apparently that's inadequate. Sir, I would prefer to call it incomplete. Incomplete. And the reason it's incomplete is simply because there were so many people that were not unaware. Unaware. I was on Guam, Mr. Chairman. I was 17 years of age at that time when this thing was happening. I come from a family of 8 children, and my mother and father, the 10 of us. Our concern at the time was clearing the debris from our home and finding a meal for the next time that we sit down. We were stunned later on when we discovered that there had been this commission out there, and you just can't imagine how welcome it would be if you're starving and somebody handed you $1. And that's what we would have embraced the person. So I think that there is a sentiment, and I think it's a very distressing sentiment, that somehow this thing is now over. I say it's incomplete, and I say that we need to give them another shot. The second thing that was mentioned was that at least, good grief, this kind of distresses me somewhat as a Marine officer, that someone from the Heritage Foundation would characterize the death, kill in action as being that's enough. What else do you want us to do? What else do you want us to do? We liberated you. It shows an intensely ill-informed person that would write that. It presumes that the reason the United States came to Guam was to liberate us, and that alone. It presumes that the reason we captured the Northern Marianas, rather than liberate them, was to set them free. That's not enough. Because you'd have to answer the question, why did we lose so many people in two of the fiercest battles in World War II on either theater? Taking Peleliu, no residents, and taking Iwo Jima, no residents. So the argument falls flat on its face, sir, that somehow the United States came. We are grateful. I know we're grateful. But by golly, we gave the United States, we gave them a base, and between Saipan and Guam, we practically defeated the Japanese by ourselves because of our land was used. So forgive me, sir, for speaking so loudly, but this is very dear to my heart. I'm also going to mention that the matter that you mentioned about the treaty of, the $10 million or $10 billion. I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. I cannot imagine that an organization such as the House, with all its tremendously capable people of the United States government as well, that somehow we cannot find a way to say that out of that $10 billion, we must be able to carve a few pennies and settle this matter. Now, why do we want to settle this matter? We want to settle this matter, sir, because we need Guam. Now, the military likes to describe Guam as the tip of the spear. Well, Guam has been the tip of the spear since 1898. I have here a picture, Mr. Chairman. I have a picture of stamps that were issued in 1990 while I was here. And it's a picture of Guam. Guess what it says parenthetically? A U.S. outpost. So I challenged it before a committee. Why do you call Guam a U.S. outpost? The committee staff checked it all out. They called me in and said, because that's what it is. And I said, I understand. That's what it remains. It would appear. So what I'd like to say to you, sir, is that this whole idea of compensation and the whole idea that somehow we don't owe the people of Guam, there's a lot more to what is intended here than monetary value. At the risk of misquoting it, why don't we call it, given the intensely loyal sentiment on Guam for the United States, why don't we call it that the lack of response is obviously unrequited love? Unrequited love. We now are about to ask them one more time to look at China and to look at North Korea as an outpost and say, hey, will you let us know when something else is happening out there? And I say to you, and I'm way past my time, obviously, and I don't want to be chastised about this, but Mr. Chairman, if you don't remember anything else that I have to say is that, sir, we're not trying to get this compensation to bring back the dead. What we're trying, sir, is to get this compensation to honor the living.